Last Tuesday night, I was out on the back deck flipping steaks on the grill, just minding my own business, when my wife came out looking like she was about to drop some kind of bombshell. She had this dramatic look on her face, and then she hit me with it: "This marriage is suffocating me. I can't breathe anymore." I remember turning off the grill and just staring at her for a second. I didn't freak out or start pleading with her, I was honestly just curious about where she was going with all this. She launched into what sounded like a well-rehearsed speech about how she needed space, how our relationship had turned toxic and controlling. Apparently, her book club buddies had convinced her she was living some kind of oppressed life. I set my tongs down and asked, "Really? You feel suffocated?" She nodded, putting on this over-the-top performance, like she was auditioning for a Shakespeare play or something. "I need air. I need freedom. I need to find myself again," she declared. I almost had to laugh. Here was a woman who had full access to all our joint bank accounts, drove around in a car I paid for, lived in a house where she never once chipped in for the mortgage, and somehow, I was the one making her feel trapped. But instead of pointing out how ridiculous that sounded, I decided to do something she clearly wasn't expecting. "You know what?" I said, heading toward the sliding door. "You're absolutely right." The look on her face was priceless, she was totally thrown off. I could tell she'd been expecting tears, maybe a big argument, or at least some desperate promise from me to change. But instead, I was just agreeing with her. "You need air," I said, holding the door open for her. "And I'm going to make sure you get all the air you could possibly want." She followed me inside, but now she looked a lot less sure of herself. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. I walked over to the kitchen drawer, grabbed a notepad, and started writing. "I mean exactly what you said. If this house, this marriage, this whole life we built together is making you feel like you can't breathe, then the answer's pretty simple. You need to be somewhere you can breathe easy." She started backpedaling fast. "I didn't say I wanted to leave," she insisted. "I just meant we should work on things. Maybe try counseling or something." I looked up from my notepad, already jotting down a list. "No, you were pretty clear. You said this marriage is suffocating you. I'm not about to be the kind of guy who forces his wife to stay somewhere she feels trapped. That would make me exactly the controlling person you just accused me of being." I could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes. This was definitely not how she thought things would go. I'm guessing her book club friends told her that if she threw down an ultimatum like this, I'd be begging her to stay, promising to change, maybe even groveling a little. But instead, I was giving her exactly what she said she wanted. "Tomorrow," I said, still focused on my list, "we're going to start making sure you get all the fresh air you need, outside this house, outside this marriage, outside this so-called oppressive life where you apparently can't breathe." She just stood there, completely stunned, while I kept writing. Eventually, she managed to get a word out. "You can't be serious." I looked up and gave her a calm, steady smile, not mean or anything, just the look of a guy who finally gets what's going on. "I'm dead serious. You want air. You're about to get more air than you ever thought possible." The next morning, she woke up to the sound of boxes being put together downstairs. When she wandered into the kitchen in her robe, I was already 3 boxes in, packing up her stuff like I'd been doing this for years. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling a bit. Without even looking up from folding her sweaters, I said, "Just helping you get some breathing room. These boxes will make it easier for you to move your things to wherever you'll finally get all that fresh air you've been talking about." She stood there for a minute, probably waiting for me to stop, to break down, to admit I was just bluffing. But I kept packing, calm and steady, just like I handle everything else in life. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, trying to sound like she was still in charge. "I'm not actually leaving. We just need to talk about our issues," she said, her voice a little shaky. I stopped what I was doing and looked her straight in the eye. "Our issues? Yesterday, you told me this marriage was suffocating you. You said you couldn't breathe. That's not just some little problem we can work through. That sounds like someone who needs to be somewhere else. She shot back, you're twisting my words. Am I? I asked, pulling out my phone and holding it up for her to see. Want to hear exactly what you said? Because I've got it right here on a voice memo. Her face went white as a sheet. She clearly hadn't expected me to keep any kind of record. Most guys, I guess, would have been too caught up in their feelings to think straight, but I learned a long time ago that when someone shows you who they really are, you better pay attention. You recorded me without asking, she said, her voice rising. I recorded a conversation about the future of our marriage. Seemed like something worth getting right, I replied, turning back to the boxes. Don't worry, you'll have all the privacy you want once you're out there getting that fresh air you need. She tried a new tactic, stepping closer and softening her tone. Honey, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. Maybe I was just having a rough day. Everybody says things they don't mean sometimes. I paused, stood up, and looked at her. That's funny, because last night you sounded pretty sure you'd been feeling this way for months. You even said your book club friends helped you realize how oppressed you were. That doesn't sound like a bad day to me. Just mentioning her book club set her off again. They're just worried about me, okay? Oh, you mean the same friends who've been divorced twice between them and spend their evenings griping about men instead of actually building something real? I said, taping up a box a little harder than I needed to. Those are the friends who are so concerned. Don't you dare judge my friends, she snapped. I'm not judging anyone, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm just pointing out that women who can't keep their own relationships together probably aren't the best people to take advice from if you're trying to save yours. She just glared at me, fuming, while I started packing up her jewelry, her books, and that whole collection of candles she never lit but always insisted on keeping. I packed every single thing with the same steady, careful focus. After a while, she finally broke the silence. Where exactly am I supposed to go? There was a tremor in her voice now, the first real crack in her confidence. That's not my problem to figure out, I said, not missing a beat. You said you needed air, and I'm giving you the chance to find it. Where you decide to breathe is up to you. This is our house, she protested. No, this is my house, I replied, keeping my tone calm. The mortgage is in my name. The bills are in my name. The insurance is in my name. You've been living here as a guest. And honestly, not a very appreciative one, if I'm being real. The truth was finally starting to dawn on her. She'd played this game thinking she was holding all the cards, but now she was realizing that ultimatums can go both ways. You can't just kick me out, she said, her voice getting desperate. I'm not kicking you out, I told her, sealing up another box and scribbling bedroom on the side. I'm helping you leave a marriage that you said was suffocating you. There's a big difference. Unless, of course, you were lying about feeling trapped, but that would make you manipulative, and I know you're not that kind of person. She didn't have a comeback for that. At this point, anything she said would either mean she'd been lying or that she really did want to leave. I'd boxed her in, and we both knew it. By the time afternoon rolled around, she'd shifted from being confused to trying every trick in the book. The tears started around lunchtime, followed by all these dramatic speeches about how much she loved me and didn't want to lose our marriage. Please, she sobbed, grabbing onto my arm as I carried another box out to the garage. I was just frustrated. Every couple goes through tough times. I gently took her hand off my arm. Look, rough patches are when you're arguing about dirty dishes or forgetting an anniversary, not when someone says they feel suffocated in their own marriage. That's a whole different ballgame. She tried to backpedal. I didn't mean it literally. Well, then maybe you shouldn't have said it so literally, I replied, setting the box down and turning to face her. Here's what I think really happened. Your book club friends got in your ear and convinced you that stirring up some drama would make me more attentive, maybe even desperate to win you back. You figured if you dropped a bomb like that, I'd be falling all over myself to prove how much I care. The look on her face told me I'd hit the nail right on the head. But here's the thing you didn't count on, I went on. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps through hoops for emotional games. If someone tells me they're unhappy, I take them at their word. And if my wife says she feels suffocated in our marriage, I respect her enough to help her find a way out. That's when she switched gears again, this time getting mad. Fine. Maybe I do feel suffocated sometimes. Maybe I do need more space. But that doesn't mean I want a divorce. Perfect, I said, not missing a beat. Then this setup is ideal. You'll get all the space you need, and I'll finally have a house where I can breathe easy, without tiptoeing around someone who feels oppressed just by having me around. She glared at me. You're being cruel. No, I'm being logical, I told her. Cruel would be making you stay somewhere you said was suffocating. I'm actually being kind by helping you get the air you said you needed. That's when she made her biggest misstep, she called her mom. Not even an hour later, my phone started ringing. Her mother's voice was sharp and full of accusation the second I picked up. What's this I hear about you kicking my daughter out? I'm not kicking anyone out, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm helping your daughter leave a marriage she described as suffocating. She didn't mean it like that, and you know it, her mom snapped. Really? Because she was pretty clear with me. She even told me her friends helped her realize how oppressed she was. That doesn't sound like something you just blurt out in the heat of the moment. That sounds like something she's been thinking about for a while. There was a long pause on the other end. I could tell her mom hadn't expected me to have all the details. Look, I continued, I get that you want to protect your daughter. But she's a grown woman, and she made a very clear statement about our marriage. I'm just respecting her enough to take her seriously. You can't just throw away a marriage over one argument, her mom insisted. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. She told me she felt suffocated. I'm giving her the space she said she needed. If she changes her mind and actually wants to be married to me, she can show me with her actions, not just her words. What's that supposed to mean? Her mom asked. It means she needs to decide if she wants to be a wife or if she wants to be a single woman playing house. Because right now, she's been acting like the latter while expecting all the perks of the former. The call ended not long after that. I could tell her mom hadn't expected to run into someone who wouldn't just cave or apologize for standing his ground. By the time evening rolled around, my wife was back to crying, but this time she was trying a different approach. She realized none of her old tricks were working, so she started appealing to our past. What about everything we've built together? All our memories, our plans for the future. I was taping up the last box of her things when she said it. I looked up and, for the first time, saw a real panic in her eyes. Those memories are still there, I said, keeping my voice calm. But they're not enough of a reason to stay in a marriage where one person feels trapped. You taught me that yesterday. I made a mistake, she whispered. No, you made a choice, I replied. You chose to listen to people who don't really care about you. You chose to test me instead of just talking to me. You decided to gamble with the foundation of our marriage just to see if you could get a rise out of me. I stood up and glanced at the stack of boxes, everything she owned, packed up neat as can be, ready for her next move. I turned back to her and said, well, you definitely got a reaction. It just wasn't the one you were hoping for. The following day, she brought in backup. Her whole book club rolled up to my front door like they were staging some kind of intervention. 5 women, all of them convinced they could guilt-trip me into changing my mind. The ringleader, who'd been divorced twice and seemed to think that made her a relationship guru, stepped forward and announced, we need to talk. I didn't budge from the doorway. Actually, you don't. This is between me and my wife. She's our friend, and we're not going to stand by while you emotionally abuse her, the ringleader shot back. That's when I couldn't help but smile. They just handed me exactly what I needed. Emotionally abuse her. By respecting her very clear wish to leave a marriage she says is suffocating her. I pulled out my phone again. Would you like to hear exactly what she said? Because I've got it right here. I hit play, and her voice came through loud and clear, talking about how the marriage was suffocating her, how she couldn't breathe, how she needed freedom. You could see the discomfort ripple through the group as they realized they were hearing their own advice echoed back at them in her words. Suddenly, their confidence in this little intervention started to crumble. She was just venting, one of them tried, but her voice was shaky. Really? Because this sounds like a woman who's made up her mind about her marriage. Are you saying she doesn't know her own feelings? That seems a little patronizing, don't you think? I watched as they exchanged uneasy glances, realizing their argument was falling apart. The ringleader tried one last time. A good husband would fight for his marriage. I leaned against the door frame and looked her right in the eye. A good husband listens to his wife and believes her when she tells him how she feels. A good husband doesn't force someone to stay in a marriage they say is suffocating. Unless you're suggesting I should ignore her words and trap her in a marriage she doesn't want. Is that what you're recommending? They had nothing left to say. Every point they made either made me look like the respectful one or made her look like she was lying. There was no way out for them. She's scared, one of them finally admitted. She doesn't know where to go. That's tough, I said, not unkindly. But it's not my job to fix problems she created. She chose to put your opinions above our marriage, and now she gets to deal with what comes from that. After they left, my phone started blowing up. First her dad called, then her brother, then a couple of our mutual friends. Every call started the same way, aggressive, trying to shame me into backing down. But once I calmly explained what happened and played the recording, they all came to the same conclusion: she'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The most interesting call was from her father. After he listened to the recording, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Son, I raised her better than this." "I know you did," I told him. "But somewhere along the line, she started listening to people who don't really care about her. Those book club women have been steering her wrong from the start. I warned her about that." "Well, now she gets to see what their advice is really worth," he said, letting out a heavy sigh. "You're handling this the right way. A man's got to have standards." We ended that call with more mutual respect than we'd had in years. But honestly, the best moment came later that evening. She was in the next room, probably hoping to overhear me falling apart or admitting this was all just an act. Instead, she heard me talking to my brother on the phone, saying, "No, I'm doing just fine. Actually, I'm sleeping better than I have in months." It's honestly wild how peaceful a house can feel when you're not tiptoeing around someone who treats you like the bad guy. For the first time in ages, I could just breathe, move around, and be myself without worrying about setting off some new complaint or accusation. She showed up in the doorway, her face a mix of shock and hurt. "You really meant it," she said quietly after I hung up the phone. "You're actually relieved I'm leaving." I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence hang in the air. "I'm relieved the games are finally over," I told her. "I'm relieved I don't have to keep pretending everything's fine while you and your friends cook up new ways to test my loyalty. I'm relieved I can finally see who you are underneath all the manipulation and drama." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "This isn't who I really am." "Then prove it," I said, my tone steady. "But you're going to have to do it from somewhere else, because I'm done being your test subject for all those emotional tricks you picked up from women who couldn't even keep their own marriages together." She just stood there, finally realizing that every single one of her strategies had blown up in her face. The man she thought she could push and pull was now completely out of her reach. A few days before she was supposed to move out, she decided to go nuclear. I came home from work and found her sitting at the kitchen table, divorce papers spread out in front of her like some kind of final play. "Fine," she said, not even looking up at me. "If this is how you want to do things, let's make it official." I set my keys down and walked over, glancing at the paperwork. It was just standard divorce forms, nothing filed yet, just enough to try and rattle me. I sat down across from her and said, "Interesting timing. 3 days ago, you were begging me to work things out, and now you're ready to end it all. You've made it clear that's what you want," she said, her voice tight. "Have I?" I asked. "Because I don't remember ever saying I wanted a divorce. All I've done is help you leave a marriage you said was suffocating you. If you want to make it official, that's your call." She finally looked up, searching my face for some sign of panic or desperation. But all she saw was calm, maybe even a little bit of relief. "You really don't care, do you?" she said, her voice cracking. "I care about honesty. I care about respect. I care about being with someone who actually wants to be with me," I told her, leaning back in my chair. "What I don't care about is playing games with someone who treats marriage like a chess match, always looking for an angle, always ready to sacrifice something just to see what happens." "It's not a game," she insisted. "Then why are you sitting here with divorce papers you haven't even filed, just waiting to see how I'll react?" "That's literally playing games." She stared down at the papers, finally realizing her bluff had been called, again. "You know what's really sad?" I said, my voice softer now. "You had a good man who loved you, supported you, and treated you with respect. But instead of appreciating that, you let a bunch of bitter women convince you that happiness meant keeping me off balance and insecure. They were just trying to help me," she said, almost pleading. "No, they were just projecting their own failures onto your marriage, and you let them," I replied. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the yard I'd been mowing and raking by myself for months while she was off at her book club meetings. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, still looking outside. "You can file those papers if you want. You can walk away from this marriage and see if your life really does get better following their advice. Or you can take some time away from here, away from them, and figure out who you actually are when you're not performing for an audience." She looked confused. "What does that mean?" I turned to face her. "It means you go stay with your sister, just like we talked about. You take a real break from this marriage and from your toxic friend group. You spend some time thinking about what you actually want, not just what they think you should want." "And then what?" she asked, her voice small. "Then you decide if you want to be married to me or not. But here's the deal, if you decide you want to come back, it won't be to the same marriage you left. I'm done walking on eggshells. I'm done being treated like the enemy in my own home. I'm done with the tests, the drama, and the manipulation. If you want to come back, it's got to be real, and it's got to be different." She sat there in silence for a long time, just staring down at those divorce papers. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I want to come back, but you don't want me anymore?" I shrugged. "That's a risk you'll have to take. Just like I'm taking the risk that you might decide you actually like the single life your friends keep hyping up as so much better." She shook her head, looking lost. "This isn't how marriage is supposed to work." "You're right about that," I said. "Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, two people who respect each other and work together. What we had turned into me constantly trying to keep the peace while you pushed boundaries and stirred up drama, all because some women who failed at marriage themselves told you that's what you should do." I walked back over to the table and looked down at the stack of papers. "So, what's it going to be? Are you going to file these and find out what divorce really feels like? Or are you going to take some real time to figure out what you actually want, instead of what they want for you?" Her hands were shaking as she picked up the papers. For a second, I thought she might actually go through with it. But instead, she folded them up and slipped them into her purse. "I need to think," she said quietly. "Good," I replied. "That's the first sensible thing you've said in weeks." She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something like respect in her eyes. "You really weren't going to beg me to stay, were you?" "Never," I said. "A man who has to beg someone to love him isn't worth loving in the first place." She left on a Saturday morning. There was no big scene, no last-minute drama, just her loading boxes into her car while I watched from the kitchen window. Her sister came to help, shooting me looks like I was the villain in all this, but I didn't pay her any mind. The house felt different right away, not empty, just peaceful. I could finally breathe without wondering what kind of mood she'd be in or what new drama her book club had cooked up for her to bring home. A couple of weeks went by. I threw myself into work, started hitting the gym more, and finally tackled some projects around the house I'd been putting off. Friends would call, expecting to find me a wreck, but instead, they found a guy who was more relaxed than he'd been in a long time. My brother even commented during one of his visits, "You don't seem devastated." Why would I be? I told him. For the first time in ages, I'm living with honesty. I'm not pretending anymore. Don't you miss her? He asked. I miss who I thought she was, I admitted. But that person turned out to be an act. The real her showed up when her friends convinced her to blow up our marriage. By the third week, the phone calls started. She'd call just to check in, trying to see if I was falling apart without her. Each conversation made it clear I wasn't the same man she'd left behind. "How are you doing?" she'd ask, hoping to hear regret or loneliness in my voice. "I'm great. How about you?" "It's been hard. I'm staying with my sister, but it's not. I mean, I miss our house." "It's not our house anymore," I'd remind her. "It's my house now. You said it was suffocating, remember?" Those calls never lasted long. The real turning point came when her sister called me directly. She told me my wife had been miserable, crying all the time, and realizing that her book club friends weren't nearly as supportive when she actually needed them as they were when they were egging her on to blow up her marriage. "She knows she made a mistake," her sister said. "Knowing and fixing are two different things," I replied. "If you want to know what it would take for me to even consider giving her another chance, it starts with her proving she's learned something. And that means cutting ties with the people who convinced her to destroy her marriage in the first place. She already has. She quit the book club last week." "That's a good start," I said, "but quitting the book club doesn't erase the damage. She spent months treating me like the enemy because they convinced her that's what strong women do. She needs to figure out who she is when she's not performing for an audience." "She wants to come home," her sister said. "This isn't her home anymore," I told her. "If she wants to rebuild something with me, it's going to have to be from the ground up, and it's going to be on completely different terms." About a month after she moved out, she showed up at my door, not with boxes or a list of demands, but just asking if we could talk. She looked different this time. There was a humility about her, maybe even a little bit of that brokenness you get when life finally teaches you a lesson the hard way. Before I could even invite her in, she blurted out, "I was wrong. About everything." I just nodded and said, "Keep going." She took a shaky breath. "Those women, they weren't really my friends. They were just miserable and wanted someone else to be miserable with them. They convinced me that being grateful for a good man made me weak. Now I finally understand the difference between being strong and being stupid. I threw away the best thing in my life because I let bitter people convince me I deserved more than being loved and respected." We sat down and talked for 3 hours, really talked, the kind of honest conversation we hadn't had in months, maybe even years. She told me about how lonely she'd been, how the book club friends vanished the second she actually needed them, and how she finally realized all their advice was just meant to drag her down to their level. As we wrapped up, she looked at me and said, "I don't expect you to just take me back. I know I have to earn your trust again, if you're even willing to let me try." I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in a long while. "If we do this, we're not going back to what we had. That marriage ended the day you decided you were suffocating in it. If we're going to build something new, it's got to be with a woman who understands the difference between being a partner and putting on a performance." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I get it. And if I ever let outside voices come before my husband again, I know there won't be a second chance. If I mess up, I'll be gone for good. I just said, if you want to come home, then show me you know what home really means. 6 months down the road, we were stronger than we'd ever been, not because we tried to patch up the old marriage, but because we built something new from the ground up. She learned that a man's respect isn't something you just get and keep no matter what, you have to earn it and treat it like it matters. And I learned that sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to give them exactly what they ask for, even if it means letting them go for a while. Funny thing is, she never asked for air again. Turns out, she could breathe just fine once she stopped letting other people poison her with their misery. And that's where our story wraps up. If you've stuck with me this far, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to our channel, it really helps us out. I've picked out 2 other videos I think you'll enjoy, so feel free to check them out. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.